Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Miranda Alliance ALEX AfCFTA webinar under the theme Harnessing a New Trade Horizon. We have joining us today delegates from all over the world and a substantial number from the African continent. We also have a galaxy of very exposed and experienced trade specialists who will speak to us on the panel. We will also have the distinguished pleasure of listening to a keynote address from His Excellency Kabine Komara, former president of Guinea, and himself an international trade guru. Permit me to make a few introductory remarks to set the tone for this webinar. In 1971, a young African musician by name Fela Ransom Kuti made a record in London's Abbey Road Studios. He titled the record By Africa. In 1977, a distinguished son of Africa, Sekou Touré, the president of the Republic of Guinea, wrote a book, Africa on the Move. Clearly, we know that it is no longer if or when, it is how. It is how Africa moves and how it does business within its own boundaries. The picture has not been very nice. A global comparison of intra-regional trade shows that Africa does only 18% of intracontinental trade today. Latin America, on the other hand, does 35%. Asia does 45%. And Europe is leading the rest of the world with 60% intra-Europe trade. The picture gets even darker. Africa exports 80% of its output to non-African countries. And it imports 90% of its requirements from non-African economies. The export-import trade picture is a function of the higher prices that non-African countries have to offer for the primary products that Africa produces. It is also a picture of the better industrial base and demand for raw materials that Africa produces. Therefore, it is not difficult to see that with a weak manufacturing base and a high import dependence, we're not getting much done amongst ourselves in Africa. Remarkably, there's no intermediate group goods production from our economies passing from one border to another. It is all primary products galore. Many organizations try to depict how trade is done and how economies are developing all over the world. They have classified them into factor-driven economies, transition economies, efficiency-driven economies, and these are broad categories which only admit only 2 or 3 African countries. Nigeria features on the factor-driven zone. Egypt features on the transition from factor-driven to efficiency-driven, and only Mauritius and Tunisia make the grade to efficiency-driven category. This is not a good picture, and that is what the AfCFTA seeks to correct and adjust. Africa needs to trade with Africa. When you look at the global competitiveness index drawn up by many of the organizations that monitor development all over the world, you will find that Africa's global competitive index either suffers from a lack of data, or whatever is drawn from the available data is very lopsided. We are at the bottom of the pile. Therefore, isn't it time for Africa to produce what Africa needs to consume and get itself into a situation where it can upscale and upskill its goods and services before it can approach an export market? But while doing that, it can conserve its resources by trading intra-Africa on standards which we are gladly finding that the African Standards Organization is actively putting together. Now, the unfavorable economic matrix is coming out of very many factors. There's wide disparity in policies and economic structures, and there's political instability and corruption, and all of the other usual things that are put on the menu when you are looking at things like poor human capital development, inefficiency of markets, and low levels of business sophistication. The war games and war stories that you hear at the WTO amongst countries who are members of the WTO tells a very good story. It is an encouraging story that it is not always that the battle is to the strongest. If the weak get together, they sometimes win. There was an episode in 2001 when African countries, during the pandemic, the AIDS pandemic, did put their foot down on standards that were to be devised for pharmaceuticals. This brought the developed countries of the world to the table, and negotiations eventually ended in favor of African countries as a body and a unit. Of course, Africa this time included Brazil and a few other South American countries. So it then tells us that the need for experts who understand global trade, who will visit those disciplines on Africa trade, is completely inevitable. Therefore, in rounding up these opening remarks, let me ask a few questions. Will ASO, the African Standards Organization, give us an African standard on goods and services? Will Sekou Toure, Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, and Nelson Mandela move Africa from the league of underdeveloped or developing nations to a developed continent? This is a business that the experts around the room this morning will be treating. And we are sure that they will treat us to the best of thinking, the best of rationalization, and we will have a great event, which we will be glad to share with the various institutions that are working on the AfCFTA. I stop here and I say good morning and have a good time. Thank you. I hand over to my good friend, Ricardo, to introduce the keynote speaker.
Thank you, my dear friend Soji, and welcome everyone. Our keynote speaker today is His Excellency Kabine Kamara, who, as Soji mentioned in his introduction, has a wide curriculum, having been the former Prime Minister not only of Guinea-Conakry, but also having been involved in a number of multilateral institutions and with wide experience in African trade and intercontinental trade issues. And he will speak to us today about his vision on the AfCFTA as a mobilizer of the African continent and its capacity to bring a wider ranging economic development to Africa and all Africans. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Yes, we are looking at something that we are in.
Your Excellency.
But your mic is on mute.
Yes. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Is it on now?
Yes, good morning, Your Excellency.
Okay. First, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the organizer of this important event and for honoring me with an invitation to deliver the keynote address on an important theme, the AfCFTA, harnessing a new horizon for trade. The overarching theme of the webinar is not only apt, but also timely. Given the time constraint, and the reference of a panelist expected to speak after me, I will focus my address on issues of specific importance. As you all know, the agreement came to force in July 2019 in Niamey, Niger, after more than 10 years of journey, and the activities were officially launched in January 2021. The last miles of this journey were successfully carried out thanks to President Kagame and President Muhammadu Yusufu, two African leaders who put all their strengths in the balance to get the document to conclusion. The implementation body of the agreement, as you know, lies in the hands of the Secretariat, which is headquartered in Accra, Ghana. Maybe it's important to know what are the objectives of the AfCFTA. It has provided in the agreement 8 general objectives and 5 specific ones. I will just cite 3 of the general objectives. First, create a single market for foods services facilitated by movement of persons in order to deepen the economic integration of the continent. Second, lay the foundation for the establishment of a continental customs union at a later stage. Enhance the competitiveness of the economy of state parties within the continent and the global market. Resolve the challenges of multiple and overlapping membership and expedite the regional and continental integration. I have just started 5 of the general objectives. As for specific objectives, I will just cite 2. The first is to progressively eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade in goods, and then progressively liberalize trade in services, cooperate in investment, intellectual property rights, and competition policy. It is also important to note that the agreement provides for 3 following protocols. The first one is the protocol on trade in goods. The second one is the protocol on trade in services. And the last one is a protocol on rules and procedure on the settlement of disputes. Now, having recalled that, let me ask you, can the AfCFTA be a game changer in Africa? To answer this question, I must acknowledge that Africa's current trade pattern is less than satisfactory, as it was just alluded by my predecessor. We are importing goods for remote non-African countries, whereas much of these products are products produced much closer, either in neighboring countries or other African countries with an industrial base. So why do retailers source them halfway around the world? The answer is only that a patchwork of trade regulation and tariff that makes African intra-African commerce costly, time-wasting, and cumbersome. As a result, the intra-African trade is very poor in terms of figure, as was alluded by my predecessor. The aim of AfCFTA is to address all those inconsistencies. It offers first tremendous opportunity for African economic transformation and for the effective integration of Africa. The full implementation will create an integrated single market for goods and services and achieve a free movement of people and capital across the continent. with tremendous benefit. Note that with the population growth projected to double by 2060, the economies of scale associated with the continental free trade area will become even more important, with combined GDP rising to up to $16 trillion by 2060. So the scope of FTCA will have widespread changes. Business, traders, and consumers in Africa will no longer be constrained by tariffs, and mechanisms will be put in place to assist traders that are burdened by non-tariff barriers. The diversification of sources of growth is also expected to accelerate the growth of labor-intensive employment opportunities and boost per capita income growth and domestic consumption across the region. At the same time, the productivity growth and competitiveness gains associated with increasing economies of scale will accelerate the development of regional value chains and sustain the growth in Africa. The transformation of the African economy is expected during the implementation of the agreement will also reduce the exposure of countries across the region to the risk of recurrent balance of payment crises, which have been highly correlated with commodity price cycles. I have just started a few of the outcomes that we derive from the implementation of the agreement. I know that my follower will more elaborate on the issues so that we can deepen the understanding. Thirdly, I must say that it is an ongoing negotiation process. Negotiations are still ongoing and were sustained during even the COVID-19 pandemic downturn, with negotiators drawing on digitalization to advance the process during extremely challenging times. This commitment augurs well for future negotiation and progress on funding issues. For instance, trade in goods. At least 90% of tariff lines representing not less than 90% of value imports to be liberalized by within 5 years for developing countries and up to 10 years for least developed countries. Exclusion lists to account for no more than 3%, and liberalization on agreed rules of origin to be finalized. About other 80% agreed with outstanding rule of origin to be agreed by June 2021. As you can see, the challenge ahead is enormous. Regarding trade in services, 5 priority sectors to be liberalized: business, communication, financial, tourism, and transport. Health and education services are also being considered. And negotiation on phase 2, investment, intellectual property rights, competition policy, and phase 3 on e-commerce issues to be concluded by the end of this year. We hope that they will stand on the agenda. The projected growth of intra-African trade is also expected to boost industrial output and manufactured goods within the continent. Intra-African trade, as you know, is dominated by manufactured goods, which has been in short supply across the region. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me address some challenges ahead. And it's very important at this phase that we do understand that although the picture we have just depicted seems to be attractive, there is an important challenge ahead. The first one is the implementing capacity. The agreement is a complex document. Its effectiveness will depend mostly on the implementing capacities of the different state organs in the different member countries. Unfortunately, a quick survey reveals that apart from big trading countries, their countries do lack the needed human resources to address the burden. In some countries, even the department in charge of a file does not have sufficient budgetary allocation. More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, sorry, electricity has gone in my country. I have to call to launch the generator.
We understand that
Your Excellency, we can see you.
I'm just I'm working on the
UPS.
So be with me because I'm living in Conakry, which is a very advanced country. So you can...
So is Lagos.
Okay. So I was just saying that implementing capacity is a key. And today we also witness inconsistency among the different organs. They do not cooperate together to address the issues, which is very, very worrisome. The second challenge is the coordination role of a regional economic organization. You'll be surprised to note that today there are about 200 various organizations in Africa, out of which only 8 are officially recognized by the African Union. Apart Algeria and Cape Verde, almost each other country belongs to 2 or 3 other organizations. So the special case of Kenya is important to be noticed. Kenya belongs to minimum 8 to 10 different organizations. As you can see, it's important to resolve the challenges of this multiple and overlapping membership so that we can expedite regional organization and integration. Additionally, big trading companies and blocs across the world are also approaching part of the continent to negotiate direct agreement with them, which can go to deep and jeopardize our agreement. It's very important to note that. The last challenge is financing burden. A document that has just been sent last week by African Union reveals that the implemented cost for the next 5 to 8 years, 10 years will be around $7.7 billion. 7.7 billion. That's the cost of implementing the agreement. And the document provides that the African Union will put in place what is called an AfCFTA adjustment facility. The objective will be to smooth the implementation of the agreement and to help member countries adjust in an orderly manner to student tariff revenue losses because of implementation of the agreement. It's very important at this stage that we all be aware of that. That cost of implementing the agreement has been revealed last week in a very detailed manner. And the funding is yet to be secured. Despite that, I must say that there are some inspiring initiatives and very encouraging. Some striking measures have been already put in motion. In particular, I have been pleased and encouraged about the online non-tariff barriers reporting, monitoring, and eliminating mechanism, which became operational last year and will be an important catalyst in the continental trade integration process. Anyone that has traveled across Africa know that we are being confronted with a lot of challenges. And then this mechanism has been put in place. It has yielded positive results. We must continue because it will unlock intra-African trade. On the banking side, there have been a lot of expansion of banks outside their national borders, which is now carrying to the implementation of a sizable player to support trade and investment across the continent. There are Nigerian bank, there are Ivorian bank, there are Moroccan bank, there are even Burkinabe and Malian bank, not to talk about South African and East African bank, which is very important to support the trade. On the financing side, I'm pleased to report that the AfCFTA Bank has already pledged an amount of $1 billion in support of the adjustment mechanism facility, which demonstrates its leading role in support of the initiative. On the generation of export capacity, various countries such as Rwanda, Ethiopia, Senegal, Ghana are developing industrial parks to boost industrial output growth. Several other countries are implementing one-stop custom joint custom declaration clearance system. And also there have been initiatives about African Collaborative Transit Guarantee Scheme, which is very innovative and will help to boost the intra-African trade. On the issue of liquidity constraints, there have been now a new mechanism put in place by African Exporting Bank to put in place a system of mechanism and a platform of payment. Now, I know that there are a lot of lawyers around the table. I will now address specific opportunities for law firms. I know the heavy representation of those in legal profession in this webinar. I would therefore touch on opportunities on AfCFTA in your area. As rules-based trading system, the agreement cements Africa's commitment to economic integration and assures contractual commitment between the state parties. Effective implementation and compliance also assures certainty and predictability against reversal of commitments. The protocol of rules and procedure on settlement of disputes is the third legal instrument that forms an integral part of the agreement establishing the African free trade area. It provides for the legal and institutional framework within which disputes arising among state parties to AfCFTA will be resolved in full respect of agreed rules. It also aims to ensure that the dispute settlement process is transparent, accountable, fair, predictable, and consistent with provision of agreement. The AfCFTA provides a two-tier quasi-judicial system, providing state parties with the opportunity to resolve disputes both through diplomatic and administrative means. Traditional and legal professionals can serve as vanguards to ensure compliance and implementation of the terms of the treaty and advance for the utilization of dispute settlement board. This would contribute to building rich case law on trade matters for reference. Through the service protocol, practitioners can provide legal services outside their borders. This is very important, either directly or through commercial presence or by establishing firms through mergers and acquisition. This is a big opportunity that law firms should take advantage of. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not end my speech without mentioning the COVID-19 devastating effect on each and every country. But, and it is very important, despite its worsening sanitary effect, it has revealed the urgent necessity to revisit the sourcing pattern of critical and even trivial goods for Africans. The closer is your supplier, the more secure you are. That's the big lesson we have learned from this pandemic. The closer is your supplier, the more you are secure. These findings advocate for Africa to accelerate its integration and to produce within the region much of its need, as much as possible. This is particularly true for the medicine. It is particularly true for medicine. We are all witnessing it every day. Therefore, time has come to accelerate the implementation of the African Medicine Agency, whose mandate will cover the harmonization of legislation, the promotion of investment in pharmaceutical products, and the managing of crises like we are facing today. The agreement was adopted in 2018, and its effectiveness is just pending to receive the ratification of 7 states. Once agreed, it will boost medicine business in Africa, and it will promote investment in that sector. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the AfCFTA marks another milestone toward deeper regional integration and the quest for stronger and sustained growth. Like most leaders and stakeholders, I'm very optimistic about the transformational potential of the AfCFTA and encouraged by progress made so far. The commitment beyond national governments, African private sector, especially the recent establishment of a business council and the commitment of the Continental Development Finance Institution are also a source of encouragement. I would like to take this opportunity to encourage all participants attending this event, and especially all institution members of the Merida Alliance Network and ALEX to promote the implementation of the agreement. My special thanks goes to Mr. Agostino Pereira, funding partner of Merida and Associates, and to Soji Abuade, funding partner of ALEX, for twinning their efforts and resources to put in motion this important vision for the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, as a means of energizing your commitment please allow me to quote this great African. A vision that does not go along with action is a simple dream. An action that does not derive from a vision is a waste of time. But a vision followed by action is a change, can change the world. So let's make the AfCFTA a game changer for Africa trade. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You have brought out the things that were in the closet, and the panel will have quite a bit to chew on. Thank you very much for taking the time to prepare this and at very short notice accepting our invitation for you to be keynote speaker. Thank you again, sir. I am sure you'll be with us for the rest of the day and you participate in the Q&A session as it goes on. Without further ado, I am very pleased to be welcoming to this webinar the Honorable Minister for Trade and Industries in Nigeria. It is safe to say that he is himself a lawyer of repute of many years standing at the bar, and he has been governor of one of the very important states of Nigeria. It gives me great pleasure to invite Otumba, His Excellency Otumba Niyi Adebayo, to give his remarks to this webinar. Your Excellency, you have the floor, sir. I hope you can unmute. Admin, please ensure that he can unmute and his video is activated from his side. Your Excellency, please activate video from your side. Well, if you don't want to pay airfares and the hotel accommodation and you choose Zoom, you pay somehow. Your Excellency, are you able to join us now, or shall we go on and have you come in at some other point, please? Because I know you are on, but we cannot see or hear you yet. Please unmute your mic. I think there may be some difficulty there. Ricardo, are you happy to? I can hear something.
Maybe you heard me answering this subject.
Okay, okay. Can we proceed for now? And as soon as we get a prompt that His Excellency is ready, we will bring him up.
Okay.
Please proceed. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you, Soji, and thank you, Your Excellency, Kabine Komoha, for a wonderful and insightful keynote speech. It is my role this morning to introduce the speakers in our roundtable discussion, which will be moderated by Soji. Our first speaker today is Mr. Paulo Gomes, who is a global business leader, active environmentalist, and a key political actor in Guinea-Bissau. His career highlights include serving as the executive director on the board of the World Bank Group, representing 25 African nations, alternate director at the World Bank, and director of strategic planning and principal advisor to Guinea-Bissau in its efforts to join the West African Monetary Union. He's also the co-founder of NACP, president of the Benton Institute, co-chairman of the Afro Champion Initiative, and a board member of the African Union Special COVID-19 Fund. For the last 25 years, he has also served as advisor to various heads of states and of governments on key projects throughout the African continent. Mr. Gomes will be followed by Ambassador Ayo Lokani, who currently serves as the Director General of the Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce. His academic credentials are impressive and include a degree in political science, a postgraduate diploma in international law, and a master's of international law and diplomacy. Over a long diplomatic career, Ambassador Ulukani held posts, amongst others, at the Nigerian Embassy in Brussels, that is also accredited to the European Union, in the permanent mission of Nigeria to the United Nations, where he worked on economic and financial matters, South-South cooperation, and technical cooperation among developing countries, and at the Nigerian embassies in Vienna and in Canberra, Australia. Next, we will hear from Mr. Diego de Notaris, a digital trade expert based out of Asia, but with work experience in the European Union, the USA, Brazil, India, and Africa. He has 24 years experience in trade in goods and services, digital trade, trade enhancement, and legislative reform projects, advising both governments and companies, and performing detailed quantitative analysis and audits of trade flows, trade and domestic market legislation, and negotiating positions. In Africa, he has been very active and has served as advisor to the governments of 10 different nations and been involved in a complex multi-country regulatory audit to assist the African Union Secretariat in the AfCFTA services negotiations. He also assisted the Angolan Ministry of Commerce in the regulation of the digital economy. Mr. de Notaris will be followed by Ramboud Bebhoudi, who is an international trade law partner at the Geneva office of King & Spalding and provides strategic and legal advice to states and private enterprises on a range of trade-related issues, including market access, trade defense, financial services trade, and institution building. He previously served in Canada's diplomatic service as a trade lawyer, working on and arguing NAFTA and WTO cases, and advising on issues including agricultural trade, subsidies and anti-dumping, export controls, and technical barriers to trade. He was also, for a while, General Counsel of Canada's Finance Ministry and worked at the WTO Rules Division. Finally, we will hear from Mr. Antonio Nunes, an electrical engineer by training with over 20 years experience in the international telecoms industry. He was CEO of Angola Cables from its creation in 2009 until 2020, and previously worked on the creation of Unitel, which is the largest Angolan mobile operator. As Angola Cables CEO, Mr. Nunes was responsible for positioning the company as a leading player in the international telecoms wholesale market, including through the commissioning of 3 submarine fiber optic cables linking Europe and West Africa, Brazil and the United States, and Brazil with Luanda, Angola. So we have a very diverse and expert panel here today. And so I would invite Mr. Gomes to start off as our first speaker.
Thank you, Ricardo. I would like to take the opportunity to thank Miranda Alliance and Alex and my dear friend Otavio Lopez for inviting me to attend this webinar. I think we had an opportunity to have a very good introduction remark by Oji and by the Prime Minister Kabi Komara in framing the discussion that we're going to have today in this webinar. I think the good thing with introduction remark is that it can enable the panel to be interactive and for all of us to focus on implementation, because I think there have been a lot of discussion about the CFTA, enormous effort by the leadership from President Kagame to President Isufu. The key now is implementation, and we are lucky, I think, in Africa to have this very ambitious agenda, which should help us not to improvise in the next 10 years and see how we focus to implement. The existence of the Secretariat in Accra, it's extremely important with Mr. Asemia heading it. Now, how do we make sure that we move and we keep the momentum for the next 10 years? Because I think it's important, although my team is more on the rule of origin and the non-barriers in this process, it's important for everybody to understand that this CFTA for Africa, it's a matter of national security issue, combined with obviously the ambition of growth and sustainability and creating jobs for our people. by national security because the pressure we have with youth and the need for employment force us to succeed in this. If we don't manage to create the 20-something million employment job that we need every year, we're gonna be facing a very unstable Africa and the challenge that come with that. So I think it's important for all decision makers, policy makers, lawyers, economists, to have that angle of the CFTA being obviously an engine of growth, but a very important national security issue for Africa. Obviously, the issue of the rule of origin, and I think Mr. Kamara has touched on that. Most of the country now are getting ready to make the offer and to finish the offer on the 90% of the goods. And this will take a certain time to negotiate that and keep that 10% with kind of specific treatments. And that will be also object of a lot of discussion. But the rule of origin, as you know, it's like a passport that will determine the nationality of the goods that will move around. And how do we make sure that we don't become a dumping ground from goods coming from all over the place to take advantage of this several $billion, a billion human Africans and the market that comes with that. So that passport will have to be an agreement. The rule of origin has to be predictable, has to be credible, and also transparent. And the good news is that having a secretariat is going to help countries present their offer and also have a mechanism for dispute, I think give a framework for us to agree on the rule of origins. And I think it's going to be a key driver for regional integration because if it's implemented, again, in a very predictable and credible and transparent way, it will be a big incentive for value chain creation in the region, where people, business people will be attracted to establish themselves in the country and process or industrialize those commodities that you refer to. Obviously, when we talk about commodity, people think immediately about the hard commodities such as iron, bauxite, and other in case of Guinea. But the commodities we have in food commodities are an enormous opportunity. I see a country like mine, Guinea-Bissau, as an example, third producer of cashew nut in Africa, very good quality cashew nut. If we manage and we produce something in the region of 270,000 tons every year, if we manage to process only 10% of it, it's an enormous impact in terms of fiscal revenues, but also job. And this is something that could have also a good market. A country like Guinea-Bissau with 1.8 million people, if we manage to process a cashew, which is our comparative advantage in food, I mean, just looking at the market of being able to export processed cashew nut to Nigeria is the huge market. I mean, when you say Nigeria, you can even ring fence just Lagos, because Guinea-Bissau is the equivalent of a neighborhood in Lagos. But if you manage just to have a very clear strategy to sell your processed cashew nuts to Lagos, that's an enormous market. And with the job that create and also the opportunity to create on both sides. I will shift on the NTB, which is the non-tariff barriers that I believe for many people is probably even more important than the rule of origin, because then there's all measures that are non-tariff related, but for which if there is no a frame discussion and agreement on how to regulate some of the things, it could be an excuse for countries to protect themselves from import and also penalize the export. So that aspect will have to be taken into account. On those, I think countries cooperating will be very, very, very important in order for those non-tariff barriers to be, again, an excuse for preventing those trade that we are trying to encourage. I see the challenge of infrastructure will continue. If you see the challenges that we have on the borders, and the good news is that there are many African companies now that are positioning to provide those services between borders to kind of invest in joint border posts, so it would facilitate the transit on container very easily. And with the help of technology, this could help accelerate. I mean, there is a portal, an existing portal about the non-tariff barriers that many of the traders, SMEs can plug into and have information and report some of the non-tariff barriers that happen in many of the countries. So technology is coming as a very important tool to accelerate the implementation of the CFTA. So I will stop here and then give space for exchanging during our Q&A.
Lovely. Thank you, Paul. This is getting more and more interesting by the minute. With experts like you can go on all day. I think it is time for us to give room to His Excellency, the Minister of Trade and Industries for Nigeria, to please address us so that we can find out what Nigeria is about to unleash on the AfCFTA by way of strides and progress and all that. Your Excellency, you're welcome. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be part of yet another great initiative to advance the lofty goals of intra-African trade under the aegis of the African Continental Free Trade Area. It is pleasing to note that the private sector is embracing the concept with enthusiasm, and that this is not confined to directly impacted sectors and players. It is clear from all precedent that rulemaking, regulatory architecture, and adjudication processes underpin the success of any trading arrangements, be they regional or global. Therefore, the place of the legal profession in the scheme of things is pivotal and continuous. The decision of the law firm of Miranda Alliance and ALEX legal practitioners and arbitrators to put together this webinar to develop and examine themes which pertain to a market environment is equally refreshing and laudable. As Africa prepares to trade with Africa, to enhance the 18% mark according to some sources, it will be necessary for a fresh look to be taken at existing links, rules, and market structures among the regional institutions on which the building blocks of the AfTA are to be built. In December 2020, Nigeria ratified its membership of AfTA, and this agreement is expected to complement Nigeria's national development agenda and act as a catalyst for export diversification by providing preferential access to the huge African market for Nigerian products and services, which currently sources over 85% of its imports from outside the continent. AfTA is particularly interesting because Africa demands finished goods and Nigeria aspires to industrialize and progress beyond export of primary commodities. It also provides immense opportunities for Nigerian companies to provide services to Africa, especially in financial services, e-commerce, and the digital economy, where we have already developed significant domestic capabilities. As can be seen from the roadmap, as can be seen from the map of regional economic committees, many countries play in more than one REC. The interplay among these recs will be easier to sort out through conversations provoked by events such as this webinar. I am impressed by the galaxy of speakers drawn from both regions, and note that we will be addressed by one of the doyen of African trade, His Excellency and former President of the Republic of Guinea. And some of our panelists are also drawn from our nearby trade partner, Europe. I look forward to the rich discourse which will ensue and continue after your session, and we'll be happy to integrate your findings either at African Ministers of Trade level, where my counterpart Ministers of Trade meet to work on trade issues, or in Nigeria, where my ministry is the anchor government institution for all trade-related matters. I'm grateful for your kind invitation to address this webinar and wish you successful deliberations. I thank you, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Honorable Minister, thank you very much for that inspiring speech. We feel that we have you behind us in pursuing the initiatives that we have started. And we are hoping that at the end of this program, we will have something to send back to you as substantial output from various angles of the AfCFTA. Thank you very much once again. We appreciate your taking time out of a very, very punishing schedule, which I am familiar with, to address us. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your presence. Ricardo, over to you.
Thank you, Soji. We will now pass the ball to His Excellency, the Ambassador.
Ricardo, let's take our next panelist, please. Ambassador Ayolukoni, I presume.
Yes, sir. Okay, Ricardo.
Yes, Your Excellency, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank the organizers for this invitation. And I've just listened to the keynote address by our keynote speaker and also our dear minister, on the sideline. When I saw him with his cap and glasses, I was wondering that looked like we are both twins in terms of how we look like. And a lot of people say this generally, just on a lighter note. And it was very good to see the minister. Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. Before I continue, I'd like to draw our attention to this document. This document is the fourth meeting, the report of the fourth meeting of the AfCFTA Council of Ministers meeting. The fourth meeting, the final report. I want to draw our attention to it. And of course, and that's those of us who have not seen it, because it was the meeting of the Council of Ministers, which was held 2nd February video conference. I mean, it goes on the elections of the Bureau. It also has the report in terms of the AfCFTA AfCFTA facility. It also looked at the position of the Secretariat. What is the situation now? And then, of course, it speaks about a whole range of other issues, the AfCFTA adjustment facility, like I talked about. And then, of course, also the report of the senior trade officials meeting. And it speaks also about the whole question of the Committee on Trade and Goods. It also speaks about the application of a digital AfCFTA. And of course, finally, is also speak about the structure and issues of the Secretariat. I'm drawing attention to it because we should not speak in the abstract. We should not speak in the abstract. And I'm coming from the perspective of a career foreign service officer who served in 3 of the multilateral headquarters in New York. I served in New York, I served in Nairobi, I also served in Vienna. The role of the Secretariat is key and very important. There's a very interesting book which says UN Ideas That Change the World. UN Ideas That Change the World, talking about gender and development issues, climate change. A lot of these ideas came from the UN Secretariat. So we must recognize first and foremost that it is very important that we get an AfCFTA Secretariat that can help, because if the Secretariat is not empowered, is not functioning well, we have a problem. I thought I should make that remarks. So I will crave your indulgence. I strongly recommend that report to all of us so that we can look at it. Secondly, let me now go on to the question and issues of infrastructure, increasing development capacity, production capacity of our countries. Because if you don't produce, especially in the area of trade and service, the area of trade, there is nothing you can do. You cannot trade. That is key. And what are those challenges? One, the question and issues of infrastructure has to be capacitated. Yesterday, because I would like to give concrete example. Yesterday, I was discussing the question and issues of, take for example, the cotton industry in Nigeria. And because of the policies of the anchor borders policy of the CBN, cotton production has improved. But what now happens in terms of the textile sector? That is one question. That is one issue. So implicitly, the issue of infrastructure, the important road, energy is key and very important to capacitate our respective countries and sectors across Africa to be able to do that. I thought I should raise that. That is key and that's very important. And also like to make reference to our keynote speaker. He spoke about a vision without action. Is of no use, or an action without vision. So now let me tell you the practical example. I will not take too much of your time. As part of our effort in NACIMA, we started a dialogue series on it. Not only that, we now started to go and visit some of our members. And I personally went to visit some of our members who are in the area of production of coffee, just around the bend to my office, not too far away. And then we were discussing, he also has a small little cafe, and they're producing coffee already for the Nigerian market. They can't even satisfy it because the demand is huge. What now happened was that they said, you're from NACIMA, we're interested, we've heard about you, the AfCFTA, what you guys are doing. He said, we are also keen on getting ready. I said, how? She now said that they've gone to acquire ground, farm, somewhere not too far away between Lagos and Ogun, with the intention of increasing the productive capacity of their company. Call coffee, to produce coffee with an eye on the AfCFTA. That is where I see vision being mixed with action. And I thought that is key, and that is very important in terms of telling our people what should be done. And of course, the respective chambers of commerce across Africa has a lot of duties to do in this area. Like the Honorable Minister said, look, listen, this is a private sector agreement, and I think that is what people should do. Now, let me go on, and before I round up, because I like to give practical example. The report talks about digital AfCFTA, this report which I'm talking about, because the whole question of COVID-19 has hit us like a jolt. In aviation circuit, they talk about flight running into CAT. CAT means clear air turbulence. So that means you disengage from autopilot and fly your equipment. Now, during the lockdown, there was a question of what's to be done. A lot of us moved there. We are now on this seminar, this webinar, online. So that means the online issue will be key. And that's why the report of the Council of Ministers, page 16 of that report, talks about the fact that the AfCFTA has embarked on a program to deploy technology and innovation initiative that can assist in the accomplishment of a digital AfCFTA. The digital ecosystem will be very important in terms of the question and issue we're talking about. And I think that is why we need to pay attention to it. And let me give a practical example again in terms of how we experienced it. I'm delighted my brother Soji made mention of Fela Kuti's Buy Africa when he was speaking. And so was many of us who love Fela's music, Afrobeat music, know what he's talking about. Buy Africa, a beautiful one. Now, he made reference to that issue in terms of the question of, during the lockdown, one of our creative entrepreneurs, because the area of services in terms of AfCFTA is key and very important. I'll mention her name, Bolanle Austin Peters. She runs Terra Culture. As part of the effort to harness the opportunities of the digital ecosystem, put onto YouTube and started presenting the musical production online. And that musical production, I think, if I'm not wrong, I think it was maybe Morimi. She was the one who also did a few other musicals. And then she also, I think, did the Kalakuta Queens. The Kalakuta Queens, when I was speaking to Bolanle St. Peters, said Kalakuta Queens, which was online, YouTube, attracted 40,000 people online. People were locked up in their houses. They couldn't go anywhere. Here we have a creative entrepreneur in the area of creativity industry now decided to put on YouTube these Kalakuta Queens and 40,000 people. I mean, you can do the calculation. So this is one of the areas which we will also look at as far as this issue, of course, is concerned. We have to be very creative, and the AfCFTA Secretariat, I'm delighted the digital AfCFTA is one of the areas which we are talking about as well. And if you look at the question of women-owned businesses too as well, we must look at the question and issues of women-owned businesses within the framework of it. A lot of them, I was recently in a part of Nigeria, ethnic fabric being produced by women. Ethnic fabric, how can we support such women within the framework of the AfCFTA to sell their goods digitally using what I'm talking about, in terms of what I'm talking about. We will have done that. Did it at the Ogun, authentic Ogun. I served 4 years in Nairobi, in Kenya. The kikoi, which the Maasai women produce, can we slot this in within the free? I mean, already they are online. They are selling a lot of this online. So we can do this within the framework of the AfCFTA too as well. Now, as I round up, let me quickly go on to the question of dispute resolution mechanism and domestication. I made reference to the fact that in aviation circuit, you have what we refer to as CAT, clear air turbulence. Don't let us deceive ourselves. And it is in that report that the AfCFTA, in terms of trading, will experience such thing. And that's why the question of the dispute resolution mechanism within the AfCFTA is key and very important. I sincerely hope that one of these days we will look at it. I can tell you that already a few people are, of course, Alex can confirm, already quietly speaking to some Nigerian law firms. Please come and capacitate us, our legal section, in terms of when we run into these problems. I'm saying that because just about a month ago, I had somebody who got goods from Ghana to Nigeria. The thing did not arrive. And the man said, look, the good is stuck at the gate. And so the question of how do you resolve such a dispute? And so it is key, it is very important. That is why the whole question of domestication is also key and very important in this context. And that is one area which I think, because the question is that how many of our countries have domesticated the AfCFTA?
Right.
These are some of the poses. These are some of the issues. These are some of the. And like I said, if you look at the services sector, because the protocol, the services sector is ultimately the good. If you look at the services sector, bank and financial, when I served in Nairobi in Kenya, there were practically no Nigerian banks. Fast forward to because I'm involved in the environment issue too as well. I found many of the Nigerian banks, GTB, UBA, Zenith, and all of them. So what this means is that de facto, the AfCFTA is already being implemented in that particular area.
Thank you.
The next thing is how do we wrap it in now? So these are the issues. I can see Ricardo, I can see him smiling, maybe asking Ambassador, can you round up? Let me round up with this. The AfCFTA took 60 years. The AfCFTA is a long distance race. It is not a short 100 meters dash. Let us take a look at that and let us start preparing for that in terms of at the end of the day, we will. So we will get there. And also, of course, like I said, the Chambers of Commerce, we're also capacitating our members to be able to get themselves ready and to also to be able to trade effectively. And I think these are just my comments. Like I said, these final reports will be very, very useful for all of us to see in terms of the Council of Ministers. It give us an update. So we are not just discussing in abstract. And I sincerely wish all of us all the very best. The people in the Secretariat is key. I spoke about UN ideas that change the world. I think the AfCFTA Secretariat will help in terms of changing the question and issue of inter-African trade as far as this is concerned. Once again, thank you very much. My dear brother Alex, it's good to see you. Honorable Minister, it's nice to see you once again. And I wish all of us a successful celebration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I think you ended on a wonderful note to pass over the floor to Mr. Diego de Notaris. In fact, as you so well mentioned, this is a long distance race. It is not a sprint. So please, Diego, your turn to enlighten us on your topic.
Okay, good evening from Indonesia. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Good evening from Indonesia. I'll just be very brief. I will mention a little bit of the work that I am doing, work that is funded by the EU and by GIZ, which is the German Development Agency. We are basically helping with the regulatory audits for the AfCFTA and also generally speaking for negotiations, and we are we are involved in interacting with the focal points in the member states and collecting data legislation in order basically to fulfill four principal aims. One is enhance transparency. So transparency in the about the frictions and the costs of protectionism, building support for regulation and policy reform. And then another aim is to analyze the service trade policies of the various partners. This is maybe very useful for negotiators. The third is informing the negotiations in terms of, what are the members up to in terms of regulation. And then finally, a fourth aim is the trade facilitation, because basically we are creating a resource for the business. So for the private sector to know about what are the trade restrictions in the other partners. I think I would like to mention that this work is mainly for the various countries involved in the negotiations. So in a way, whatever those countries are putting into, helping with the regulatory audits, they can get out in terms of information on what is the regulation in their own jurisdictions, but also in other partner countries, even in outside their own region, which is very important for continental free trade area. I think I only have 6 minutes. I prefer to stop here from the time being, and I'd rather use a little bit time to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diego. We look forward to your intervention later on in the roundtable discussion. And I will now pass the floor to Mr. Hamboud Bahoudi, please.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry for the momentary glitch. It's a great honor for me to be here. My connection with continental trade goes back to the late 1990s, when I was a young Canadian diplomat in Brussels, following and reporting on the negotiations leading up to the Cotonou Agreement. In Geneva at the WTO, I worked closely with my ACP colleagues on dispute settlement reform. I was fortunate when I started working at the WTO itself to be closely involved in technical assistance and capacity building in the region. And of course, at King & Spalding, I've had the great honor of working with the Nigerian government, which then led me to SOGI, and here I am. I can't claim expertise in continental trade. I've benefited from the insight of my fellow panelists today. It's been great. I hope that in my brief remarks and in the Q&As that follow, I bring value added on how the private sector and governments can work together to advance trade interests. So first of all, what do we mean by trade policy? This is basically a grab bag of the sum total of domestic and border measures that a country puts in place for the purpose of affecting trading goods and services, and the approaches a country adopts in respect of the measures of other countries to ensure that they do not have a negative impact on terms of trade. How does trade policy affect companies? Well, if you're domestic producers, you have to compete with unfairly traded goods. you might have to compete, that is, with unfairly traded goods, whether they're dumped or subsidized, in trade policy measures and institutions exist in order to help companies in those. If you're a domestic producer, you may also need access to cheaper input products. And the terms of trade of the country, the trade policy framework in place can have an impact on your input costs. If you're an exporter, you may face domestic measures in your export markets. These domestic measures or tariff measures. These could be measures imposed at the border, or they could be domestic measures such as discriminatory taxes, technical barriers to trade, or sanitary and phytosanitary measures that affect your products. Finally, if you're an exporter, you may face competition in trade in third markets by unfairly traded goods. That is to say, you might have to compete with goods that are domestic, that are being subsidized by the country or subsidized by a third country. And again, the object of trade policy of your home country is to remove those external barriers to your exports, and to the extent possible, to make it possible for you to compete fairly in your own domestic market, and also to get access to cheaper input products. Okay, so how do private companies, how does the private enterprise, how does the private enterprise actually engage with the government in respect of trade policy and trade measures? Well, basically, your first step is you need to identify what it is that's affecting your terms of trade. I mean, if it's just a market issue, well, there's not a whole lot that trade policy can do. But in many instances, the barriers to your trade are not the market, but rather they're found in the measures of another country. And so you need to identify what's happening to you, and with the help of experts, identify what it is, how it is that the measures of other countries and the practices of other companies are inconsistent with the trading framework within which you're operating, whether it's the AfCFTA or the WTO. Second thing you need to do is, of course, engage. Trade policy advocacy requires working with multiple partners. You start with your home country government. You start with the government of the target market. You work with allies. You develop networks. These networks can be companies that in your target market that purchase your imports, or it could be other countries that have similar problems in the target market. And this basically means that whoever is advising you needs to have a fairly broad perspective on your interactions with the market, whether it's the domestic market or the export market. And finally, and I'm going to close very briefly on this. If this engagement doesn't work, then what you do is what I have been doing just recently, which is to support the industry, to support your government in engaging in disputes, mediation, good offices, that is to say, interstate interaction that will allow the governments to resolve their differences and allow your company to do well, whether it's in the domestic market or in export markets. On that, I'm going to close my talk, and I'll wait for, I'll look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Rembod. I will pass the floor now to Mr. Antonio Nunes.
Thank you very much. And it's an honor for me to be here with this very prestigious panel. And I'm not coming from the politics of trading, but what I go to do is to share with you my experience in terms of developing business into the world. So as previous was presented by I have built a huge submarine infrastructure for telecommunications, where we link Europe to Africa, Africa to South America, and South America to the US. So it means that we becomes to make trading all over the Atlantic region and in a very big area of capability. These trading opportunities that we have done was on the digital world. And when we talk about the digital world, we don't look to borders and we don't look to taxes on the border and not even to issues on trade agreements process. But one of the things that I can share here with you is that, for example, for us was much easier to become developing business in Brazil or to developing business in US as in Africa itself, between our own neighbors or our own African partners. What I mean with this is that we have to really to arrange ways to adjust ourselves in a different matter, because we normally talk about Africa, but we have to understand that we are in Africa, many countries, and we have to look to the sustainability of the different African countries and not the continent itself. So we have to arrange ways that we can develop business between ourselves, but the sustainability of each country will be guaranteed. Otherwise, we don't feel, or we don't arrange here a traceable area and traceable platform to become developed business. One of the things that, for example, in the telecommunications, for me, was a very big and a very strange thing, is that we don't have connectivity from Angola to Namibia or to Zambia or even to the DRC. So we are linking to the USA today and we are linking to Europe, but we are not even able to link to our neighbor countries. So the point here is that in these forums and in these African Union forums, we have to arrange really ways to be able to trade between ourselves. And this trading process have to be a way that we can, first of all, trust each other in order to develop business, because without trust, we never will make business between ourselves. So I also will prefer to answer the questions and also be part of the forum as saying anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nunes, for your insight and for touching upon another important aspect that not only, unfortunately, characterizes the telecommunications business at the moment in Africa, but also transportation, which is sometimes the lack of interconnectivity between neighboring countries, which has hampered development up until now. So I will now pass the floor to my dear friend Soji to moderate the roundtable discussion amongst our speakers.
Thank you, Ricardo. I've been fed, and I am going to ask for some more. Let me start with Mr. Nunes, who just finished speaking. And let me ask you, Antonio, what do you think needs to be done to create an online support structure?
Okay, in my opinion, what you have to do is to learn with the others. So when we look to the Asian continent, they have been making trading and in a very efficient way for quite a long time between the Asian countries themselves. So we should try to build a kind of platform, for example, and I can give an example of Alibaba, for example. The people, even looking to China as an example, Alibaba has been building a trading platform that takes some years, probably 20 years, to be winning trust between the users of the platform. And when the people realize that they can trust that platform, then they become develop trading on it. So today, probably Alibaba is the biggest trading platform in the world because it was able to create trust between the users of the platform. So I think for learning from the examples that we are seeing in the market, we in Africa, we should also try to develop such a digital and developed platform that we could have should be transparent. Everybody should know it. It should be controlled by a common African entity. And then through this platform, we probably could make and accelerate our trading process.
Antonio, before I let you go, is that a public sector platform or a private sector platform?
Look, I think in Africa, the private sector in Africa is still very small. Okay, so one of the issues in Africa is that when we are talking about very big and large business, we do have to involve our own governments. Okay, the point is if we don't put the private sector also inside of this mechanism, then we don't have trust to develop that thing. So I think it should be a mixed platform between the private sector and the government platform and the government organization, so that we can have a commitment on that issue.
Lovely.
Because, for example, one of the things that we have been discussing here is borders, taxes, and all these kind of things. But imagine now that we are all using Netflix and we are all using Microsoft, and these guys don't pay in the borders. These guys most of them don't pay taxes in Africa. So we are using the digital content in such a way that if we don't accelerate our way to go, and for example, I don't fully agree with the ambassador when they say this is a long run process, because today our economy issues they are changing very, very fast. And it's not a long run, it's a speed. If we don't commit with this very fast, the outside world will invite us and it will be very easy to climb this wave again.
Thank you, Antonio. I'm going to turn that straight to Ambassador Ayulukoni and ask him to respond to that, and also to respond to a question that's nagging in my mind. Very recently in the newspapers, we read that Ghana has started trading. I'm not sure whether you have gotten on to that information yourself. What's going on here? So can you take both of those, Ambassador Lukoni, in one fell swoop?
Thank you very much. Let me just quickly react to, either we like it or not, the AfCFTA is a long distance race. It is not, because you're talking about, for example, the question of rules of origin, tariffs regime, 10 years. So that is the reality, either we like it or not. It is a long distance race. There are segments and areas of it, like I said, which there are quick wins, but overall it is. It took us 60 years to get here. We can start implementing bit by bit in terms of what exactly is happening. So that is to answer the question straight from Antonio in terms of what I'm talking about. I gave example of Bolande St. Peters and the Calcutta Queens that went online. That is it. But in terms of the nitty-gritty of it, when do you give your rules of origin? When do you, in terms of the tariffs regime? It is. There's no question about that. Let me quickly answer the question of payment system. Nasima is involved with the AfCFTA, with the AfCFTA. And of course, there is the PAPS, the Pan-African Payment System. And like I said in the report, which I referred to, the AfCFTA is coming on with the facility. So in terms of the PAPS, the Pan-African Payment System, it is possible for us within the level of the AfCFTA to take advantage of that. And like I said, we are directly involved with them in terms of the discussion. And there's also what is referred to as the MANSA. The MANSA under the AfCFTA is also one of the systems, which in context of what exactly the MANSA platform, what will be involved in it. And we need to educate ourselves about this. It's an opportunity because under it, you have a MANSA ID identification number. So that means that other institutions such as the AfCFTA are already getting ready and they've advanced. And of course, those of us who are as far as the AfCFTA is concerned,
so I think we lost you for a minute there.
We can take advantage of that.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, finally, I hope I'm clear as far as the question of the payment system and taking advantage of it is concerned. So that we can share information in terms of this because we are directly in touch with the AfCFTA in this particular area, and we are informing our member. Then the question and issues of trading are started or not. The question I'd like to, and I want any one of us who are here, when we were told
the network is special.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Please go on. Yes.
Okay, fine. what did Ghana trade in? What guided by what rule and regulation? Which country? I understand they exported. I'm just asking this question for us to learn, because media reports sometimes could be speculative and infactual. And we just don't want to have the question of spinning stories, spinning issue on this particular area. What did Ghana trade in? What were the whole issue of tariffs? Just say with South Africa. It will be so that we can learn. That is why I'm posing that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul, you're next. Let me ask you, what do you think, how far do you think rules of origin can actually go in the integration process?
Yes, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the strength of the Secretariat will be to continue to help the countries in this process of offering, and but the rule of origin have to be predictable and transparent. And the passport, it's almost like a passport, as I said, that determine the nationality of the good. And we know that some of the resistance of hesitation for some of the country was that there's a strong risk that some partners or other countries will take advantage of the CFTA to try to dump their product in other countries. And the case in point was really some of the concern coming from Nigeria. But I believe that if we do it properly and it's transparent and is well crafted, private sector will identify clearly the way to position into processing and essentially around the value chain, the food value chain, and then position at the regional level. I think many of the risk or even the lack of incentives for people to process some of the goods in their countries, and I give the example of my own country, Guinea-Bissau, is that people don't see clearly the market where they will, and the market is always turned toward Europe. But I believe that if we clarify those issues of rule of origin for some of the countries, they will be able to attract investors and play around the value chain of the specific product they want to push. In this case of Guinea-Bissau, I was mentioning cashew nut, where you could target a specific market such as Nigeria with opportunity and even ring fences in a specific town such as Lagos, in which for the size of the market, a country like Guinea-Bissau can position, process its cashew nut and target the Lagos market, and you will do well. Certainly the issue of logistics to get to Lagos will be a challenge because the coastal transportation, the process of the problem of the custom facilitation between the borders, if you truck it from Guinea-Bissau to Nigeria. But I think that having clarity and transparency on those rules of origin will really strengthen the regional integration and enable the private sector to build opportunity across the value chain and essentially driven by agro product.
Muted. Paolo, before I let you go, please explain to me and to this audience how much government will is required to implement an effective and efficient network of rules.
Look, I think countries have to, each country now, that's why initially I insisted about the issue of implementation. Each country now need to have a strategy on how it's going to take advantage of the CFTA. This cannot be improvised. And this strategy has to take place in a public-private partnership, right? And then the countries to clearly understand what is they're going to gain from being an active players. Again, there's no room for improvisation. This is so important as a caution, and this COVID has shown us that we need really different plan B in case such a pandemic arrived, and the CFTA is a plan B. So I think you need to put in that strategy in a very clear manner with the private sector for them to understand use technology for processing, so they won't go through that challenges to go from a country to another, but also use technology.
I'm going to loop into that the positions of regional economic communities in the network of rules of origin. How is that going to play, Paulo, if I may pick your brain again?
Because, I mean, as you know, the rule of regional integration entities in many of the cases in Africa can be criticized by not being an active player in pushing regional integration, and then they were stuck into bureaucracy. You can see in West Africa, for example, with the ECOWAS, we have to recognize that very early, the issue of the mobility of goods and people were really taken into consideration. You can travel across West Africa with no problem, no issue of visa. So the issue of movement of people is extremely important. Now you have to combine it with the issue of movement of goods. And the rule of origin will be very important on that, again, because if we don't clarify that, you will have many conflicts, and whatever the platform of settlement of dispute you put in place, people will just move to non-tariff barriers to block their neighbor. So I think the regional integration entity has to be a very strong convening power in partnership with the Secretariat to show the countries how they're gonna gain. I mean, in just non-tariff barriers, apparently we lose close to $20 billion in Africa because of the non-tariff barriers that we put against each other. So I think their role is to play a convening power, give clarity, predictability, transparency for countries to understand and to guide them to the strategy they need. Because once you sign it, you ratify, you need to implement it. And to implement it is not an issue of the state. It's an issue of combination between the state and the private sector.
Thank you, Paulo. I'll let you go for a minute. I'm going to go to Rambod. Rambod, how, from your experience in the Canadian and WTO exposures that you have had, how are trade remedies typically developed?
Well, that's a very open-ended question. I can go on for hours on this one.
Please don't.
No. No, let me just put it in a domestic context. It's very simple. You are selling in your market and you realize that imports are coming in at prices that don't really make sense. They don't make sense because they're lower than the price of the same good in the country that's producing them. They don't make sense because they're unusually low, or there's been a major drop. And as a producer and seller in the domestic market, what you do is you try to figure out what's going on. You look behind this, and you might find, for example, that the product is now being subsidized because the country of the exporting entity has a new program of export subsidization, of domestic subsidization, or whatever. So that's one thing. Another thing is you look at the country, where the product is coming from, and you realize that there's a major price difference between the price of the product in its home market and the price in the export market. And that price difference can't be explained by taxes, by level of, by the market conditions, by domestic measures, and so on and so forth. At that point, so whether it's subsidization or this scenario that we call dumping in trade law, at that point, you basically begin developing a case, collecting evidence on two things. Number one, on the product itself and the circumstances surrounding the product, and on the impact that this importation is having on the domestic industry. Right. You talk to your colleagues, to other players, obviously bearing in mind you don't want to create any competition problems, but you talk to them to understand whether they also observe the same market development and the same impact. And then there's a brand new trade remedy authority in Nigeria, for example, but there are trade remedy authorities in other members of the parties to the AfCFTA. And at that point, the domestic industry puts a dossier together, puts that dossier before the trade remedy authority, and then the trade remedy authority will assess it and will follow alongside that. So yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to ask a follow-up question. Do you consider it feasible for a trade remedy dossier to be at the WTO and at the AfCFTA at the same time on the same setting, on the same circumstances? Is it possible to do that?
Well,
double
actually,
shopping?
So very simply, number one, let me start with the basic ones. Trade remedy measures are imposed by domestic authorities. So first thing you do is you go and, so this is not a WTO or an AfCFTA issue at the first instance. What happens is if the other country is unhappy with the measures that are put in place, at that point they can bring a case in respect of those measures and whether or not the Trade Remedy Authority has done its job. Now, what happens in those circumstances is that the bulk of the disciplines that exist are in the WTO, and so this is if you get to that point, this is going to be a WTO matter. But let me just say what is the relevance of AfCFTA in here. What happens is in trade agreements actually remove barriers and remove tariffs. And once those protective measures are removed, that is when all these other problems become more visible. That's when suddenly goods that were not competitive in the domestic market because of the tariffs, suddenly they become competitive, and other measures come up, and suddenly you notice the impact of subsidies in a different way. And so this is where I think the AfCFTA is going to be really important, both for opening the African market. That's the most important challenge. That's the most important effect this has. But also because all the protective measures are removed, suddenly there's going to be a lot of attention paid to the trading practices of either other governments or other companies.
Because I want you to, Diego, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Right,
yes.
Right. I wanted you to take two things together because we have to round up this this session now and go to Q&A. The issue of digitalization, which you are currently engaged with in Gambia, and your experience with e-commerce and all that. What are the three major obstacles that you have seen, or what are some of the obstacles you have seen? And we've been talking about goods predominantly. What about services? What about services?
Right. When we talk about digital economy and about e-commerce in Africa today, we're talking about goods mainly, because services is not there yet. So, and we're talking, unfortunately, mainly of imports of goods from China or US or Europe into Africa. So this creates a lot of problems. First of all, problems in balance of payments, and so on and so forth. So I would say, to pick on also on the previous question, there are three major obstacles to digital economy and e-commerce and digital trade. One is Forex regulations. So basically, currencies are not freely convertible. So it's impossible to trade from one African country to another, like from, I don't know, Zambia to Angola, in their local currencies. So the second problem is access to credit, because both for entrepreneurs and for consumers, because the rates are sky high in several countries. And the third problem is high taxation for e-commerce and also generally speaking for services. So there are ways to solve this, but mainly if we stick to the old playbook, so sticking to the government currencies and so on and so forth, we don't get out of it, because these limitations, these convertibility issues would still be there. In terms of strategy, I mean, to link to what Paulo was saying, mainly two strategies are available. One is the catch-up strategy, the one that China is doing. So basically opening up, trying to limit trade, imports, and developing national champions. This is available to the largest countries, I don't know, Nigeria and other largest countries, to develop an industrial base and so on and so forth. But there are smaller African countries that they would be more comfortable with the EU way, so a pro-market approach, basically opening the economy, because they don't have a lot of domestic industry anyways. So these are, I would say, my considerations, also linking to the other speakers so far. Thank you.
Honestly, I want to take you up on a few other issues as well as the other panelists, but I'm going to have to yield to our very loyal and patient audience. There have been a few questions on the Q&A box, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Rebecca, who will run us through the questions. If they are directed to anyone in particular, we will have that person answer very briefly. If they're not, if anyone opts for it, they raise their hand to answer. Rebecca, you have the floor.
Okay, sir. Thank you, everyone. So we have a total of about 13 questions for our distinguished panelists. The first question is from Jeroboam Tojaka, and his question was directed to His Excellency Kabin Kumara. His question was, who must put the funds or finances in order to implement the AfCFTA, and what are the amounts to be contributed? How can they be allocated? Your Excellency, should I take the question again?
Yes, please.
This question is, who must put the funds or finance for implementation of the AfCFTA together, and what are the amounts to be contributed, or how can they be allocated when contributed?
Okay, thank you. The document that was sent out by the African Union last week was stated about several sources of funding. First of all, there will be a contribution for member states. The formula has not been entirely designed yet. It will depend on the weight of each country and the trading scheme, GDP, and so on, population of them. Secondly, there will be contribution from donors, particularly African developmental institutions like ADB, like Afrexim Bank, and so on. And then there will be contribution from private sector and the other. So as you can see, it has not been fully determined yet. The aim was to open the eyes of everybody about the need to address these compelling issues. So I must say that it is purposely that I raise the issue today so that the participants can from their side see how they can also try to sensitize different potential donor and contributors. So that's the question.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Our next question is from Lucia Faladi, and she wants to know whether the AfCFTA will be able to put in place sufficient structures in good time to address the vacuum that will be created as a result of the paradigm shifts that comes with the AfCFTA in an expeditious manner. This question, I was thinking, could be answered by Mr. Rambo Bibodi. or any other panelists may choose to answer.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Okay, the participant wants to know whether the AfCFTA will be able to put in place sufficient structures in good time to address the vacuums that will arise as a result of the paradigm shift that comes with the AfCFTA in an expeditious manner. Whether the AfCFTA will be able to address the structural gaps in an expeditious manner.
Well, like any institution, this is going to take time. I mean, the situation. I think the answer to the question is not whether, but when, and the when is a matter that is really up to the AfCFTA Secretariat and the parties to the AfCFTA. I think it would be it might be useful. Maybe to find out what gaps are we talking about, because the AfCFTA is not getting rid of stuff, is adding a layer of cooperation as an institutional matter, is adding a layer of cooperation that across the continent that has not existed so far. So I think I mean, you know, the AfCFTA began only a couple of months ago to operate. I think it's a little bit premature to try to wonder how things could go wrong. I think we should be very optimistic that the organization is up and running, that these events exist, that there is a great deal of goodwill for the organization, for the treaty, and also for the parties involved in it to make sure that it functions. And it's going to take time, you know. Just look at the NAFTA. It took a long time to come into full force and effect. And these are countries that 3 countries only, and then even after 25 years of functioning, it had to be renegotiated. It's really important to think of trade agreements as projects that are ongoing rather than a sort of a binary scenario. Today it functions, tomorrow it doesn't, or you know, yesterday it didn't function, tomorrow it's going to be fully functional.
Well,
Thank you so much.
I think this is a cross between the discussion that Ambassador Olukoni and Antonio were having over the timetable for getting there, whether it is a sprint or a long distance run. So really and truly, looping the Secretariat into it just completes the architecture. It depends on how participants want to run. It depends on how quickly we respond and react, and whether in fact we have goods to trade, because people have asked questions, do we actually have goods to trade?
And if I can contribute also a little bit more on that matter, it's also depend a lot on the sustainability of each country, as I said before, because the countries will trade or will agree in a certain agreement if they see that will be positive for its incomes. Otherwise, they will not commit to that particular agreements. And for example, I will insist that, for example, the services supposed to be discussed immediately, because the digital economy is a lot based on services that will run through these infrastructures. So we should starting also at the same time, not only talking about goods, but talking also about services. Because when we now discuss about data, we don't really know if data are now services or they are goods. Because when you sell software, what is that, you know? So now we can print a car or we can print a house. So that could be a good. So it's nothing that will be tangible, but will be something that can be moving other types of things as not services, as we consider.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonio. Rebecca, I've been advised by our technical people that we're running very, very short on time. Can we read out all the questions, or at least 5 of them together, and see whether we can get a quick bash through them? And I think the technical people have also positioned an announcement which is telling participants that their questions will be fully attended to by the panel if they are already in writing or if they come later in writing. because at occasions like this, you cannot afford to overspend your time budget. Please, if you can do that for us, Rebecca, thank you.
All right, so I'll be taking about 5 more questions now from the participants. The next question is for Ambassador Olukoni. The question is, are there any plans to look at how collective diaspora inflows into the continent can play a role in the success of the AfCFTA? The next question is for Mr. Paulo Gomes, and it says that will there be funding for regional transportation infrastructure to ease inter-country movement? The next question also says, this is for His Excellency Kamara. The question says, African citizens in recent times are not united, as seen by the xenophobic attack in South Africa and Ghana in recent times. How then do you guarantee free implementation of the AfCFTA? Next question again is for Mr. Paulo Gomes. How do we trade with limitations on infrastructure? Where do we get our source of funds to close the infrastructural gap? And then the last question that we will now be taking for the panelists is for Mr. Diego de Notaris. Do you think that we have to industrialize Africa first? In the absence of African products to trade, the AfCFTA will not fully play its role, and Africa will continue to import from the rest of the world. I think this question has actually been discussed extensively in the course of the panel discussion. So we could take these questions for now. Maybe if we have more time, we can come back to some others.
Ambassador?
Well, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for that, Simon. I think the question of the African diaspora and as well as the AfCFTA is concerned is key and very important. The African Union itself has its own diaspora program, the African diaspora, in which it collaborates with. And of course, during the discussion of the AfCFTA, they were also factored in. And I think we need to ramp this up and also be able to let them know that the opportunities, of course, exist. And discussions are going on in that particular area. And let me give you a practical example of it, because I'm involved one way or the other in this. Like I said, in my own experience in the foreign service, 35 years, serving in about 5 continents. I served New York, other places as well. I ended up in Australia. And Australia, the story of Australia is the story of its mining sector. The history of mining is the history of Australia. Perth, Western Australia, has a large number of African diaspora who are involved in the mining sector. So when this discussion started, we held some discussions, and I traveled. I was in Australia for the African Mining Down Under Mining Conference. And so when we were there, some of them who are in that particular area said, Ambassador, can we have him? So we held a meeting on the sidelines. We held a meeting on the sideline in context of how they can be involved in the AfCFTA in terms of the issues of mining sector, because there's the African mining vision itself. And so a lot of them are involved in it. So it is key, it is possible, it is going on. And when we were here, some of them who also came in this particular area also spoke about it. So it is left for the AfCFTA Secretariat. And that's where we're talking about the question of the capacity of the AfCFTA Secretariat to also have a special program as far as harnessing the dimension, the potentials of the African diaspora. Many of them in the diaspora, African diaspora, now have online platform. They have online trading platform, and some of them are asking questions, how can our platform be woven into the fabric of the AfCFTA? And I think these are ideas which is possible, but I think the Secretariat, of course, will work closely on it. On our part, we also have the Nasima Diaspora program. So we are working with many of them and pointing their attention to the AfCFTA, that this is an opportunity for you to be able to, of course, ramp up and be part and parcel of the AfCFTA from the African diaspora. I hope I've been able to answer those questions.
Yeah, very well, sir. Thank you.
Your Excellency?
Your Excellency, would you go?
Hello? Read again my question, please.
Okay, so your question is, African citizens in recent times are not united, as seen by the recent xenophobic attacks in Ghana and South Africa. How do you guarantee free implementation of the AfCFTA under this circumstance?
Is that question for me?
No.
For His Excellency Kabin Komara.
Okay,
yes.
All right.
Thank you very much. It is indeed very unfortunate that we have been witnessing such a regrettable event that you have just alluded to. But they are not new, actually, unfortunately. And even now, recently, within a particular country, you can have displacement of population, which can distort trade. So all this lies on good governance. The more we will implement best practice, good governance, we'll have less and less problematic issues pertaining to immigration and well-being, living together in an harmonious manner. And this is why democracy and advocating for democracy, for good governance in Africa is key to have a peaceful living standard in our country so that the citizens can feel well within their borders. And then if they have to move into another country, there will be harmonious cooperation rules. This is key today. And I must say that it is a long way to go. And apart from that, there are even those closure of border between countries, and then for various reasons. And then today, while we are talking about free movement of person and goods and capital, we first need to resolve this issue of cooperation, security, peace, and relationship. And I just want to add one word to what Ambassador Olukani has said about mining and diaspora. I'm one of the co-authors of the African Mining Vision. So it has stated a lot of things about what you call local content development. And local content does not mean only value added through transformation of technology and so on. It's also about human being expertise. And today, we have a lot of expertise in the mining sector outside the continent. If you bring them in, it can expedite and accelerate the mining transformation. In Ghana, for instance, you have many foremen, Ghanaian in Australia, while in my country, Guinea, we have the first largest deposit of bauxite in the world, and yet we are importing foremen from Europe, from America, from Canada. We can equally source them from Ghana and elsewhere. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So we could take the next question, which was directed to Mr. Diego de Notaris. Do you think that we have to industrialize Africa first? Because if there are no goods to trade, then AfCFTA cannot play its role.
Thank you. Of course, we should industrialize Africa, but not all countries can get into this exercise, and not all countries want to industrialize. I mean, there are many ways to development. As I was mentioning before, it's very important to have a strategy. So if you decide to industrialize, like for instance, I can make the example of Egypt. I helped to establish the first plant of a PET, polyethylene terephthalate, in Egypt, in North Africa, actually, in Egypt. If there are resources, local resources, and enough domestic market, of course, industrialization is the way to go, especially for the largest countries, the countries with the largest markets. But the other approach, the pro-market approach, is also available. And I'm thinking to smaller countries in this sense, and countries that can build a lot on human capital, for instance, because there are so many different ways to development. So we should not get into the frame of mind that we have to develop like they did in Europe, or like they did in America or in other places. Now the times have changed. So today there are so many ways to development, and some of them bypass industrialization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saz. I think we've taken our 5 top questions. There is a very important question here for Mr. Rambod Begudi. I think the question resonates with a lot of service providers as well and investors. It says, was it an omission that the protocol on dispute resolution under the AfCFTA failed to provide for mechanisms for the resolution of investor trade disputes? How can investment and commercial dispute be resolved under the AfCFTA, since the protocol is limited to state-to-state disputes?
Right. This is a very important question, you know, the first investor-state dispute resolution mechanism in a trade agreement was in the NAFTA. It was in the early 90s. And one of the things that we saw when the NAFTA was renegotiated last year was that as between Canada and the United States, that investor-state dispute resolution was removed. There were sound reasons for including them. There were also sound reasons for taking them out. I've written on this subject. I can send you know, in good time, I can send the my brief remarks on the relevance of investor-state disputes in trade agreements to the questioner. But I think I would say this: it is not necessarily a given that investor-state dispute resolution in the context of a trade agreement is always the best approach. There are trade agreements that include that. There are other trade agreements that don't. There are good reasons, good legal reasons and trade policy reasons to have them in trade agreements. There are also good reasons not to have them. So what I would say is, I think the state-to-state dispute resolution mechanism of the AfCFTA is a tried and true mechanism. It's used in many trade agreements. We know how it functions in the context of the WTO. And if there are any issues, any concerns about investor protection, those are properly addressed through governance mechanisms in each country, rather than by taking it outside of the judicial system of each country and having direct investor challenges to domestic measures, and then having that arbitrated by private arbitrators. I think anyway that's a choice that the parties have made, and as I said, there's nothing wrong with that choice.
Thank you, Rambod. And thank you, everyone. We are reaching the end of our session this morning. I would like to now pass the floor to my dear friend and partner, Agustin Miranda, the founding partner of Miranda Law Firm and Miranda Alliance, and ask him to deliver his closing address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. I'm sorry, my voice. I'm still embarrassed and nervous with the fact that I showed up a few minutes later. The fact is that I just mixed up the time zone. That probably an unconscious consequence of having lived for almost 20 years in Africa. So I'm still in the Africa time zone, I suspect, even though I live in Portugal. And my humble apologies go in particular to His Excellency Cabinet Camara, for I was supposed to make his introduction. Not that His Excellency needs any introduction, much less from this humble lawyer. So I'm sorry that I disappointed particularly my colleagues, the colleagues in my firm who always expect me to be punctual. On behalf of the Miranda partners, and if I may, on behalf also of my friends at ALEX, I would like to take just a few minutes to thank all the participants, the loyal, I see 85 participants, not to count the distinguished speakers. Of course, a special reference is due to our keynote speaker, His Excellency Cabinet Komara. Thank you again. And also a word of deep appreciation to Soji Eyugbade. He turns out to be a real room star, a real Zoom star in my judgment. What a stellar performance, Soji. Also, his team provided a great, efficient and seamless operation, and we are all grateful to them and to the Miranda team and my dear friend Ricardo Silva and Rita de Carvalho also. In closing, I would like just to make very, very brief comments, or two very brief comments. And say one, that as we saw this morning, the AfCFTA is inspiring African leaders and the African people to build a new horizon, not only on trade, but also on investment, capital flows, services, including, which is not unimportant, professional services. As Prime Minister Cabinet Camara stated, the AfCFTA promises no less than a vision for Africa to help change the world. We at Miranda, as an organization that has built bridges between Africa and the world for more than 3 decades, we at the Miranda Alliance, we join with Alex and our friends, the political and business leaders of this wonderful, promising, and to a certain extent also still suffering continent, in the hard work ahead to make this vision outlined by Prime Minister Camara a reality. Thank you all, and please keep safe.